Have you ever heard the names Caiaphas and Annas and felt a chill run down your spine? These were not just high priests. They were kings cloaked in religious robes, rulers of a sacred empire built on power manipulation and silence. With one whispered command, they condemned the Son of God, believing they had sealed their legacy forever. But what if the moment they nailed Jesus to the cross was not their triumph, but the beginning of their end? From the shadows of Golgotha, something unseen began to follow them. A force they could not name, a judgment they could not escape. What happened to Caiaphas and Annas after that fateful day? The answer is darker than history dares to remember. This is not just a tale of religious betrayal, it's a haunting account of how divine justice finds even the most untouchable. Stay with me as we uncover the chilling downfall of the men who thought they could silence God. In the early 1st century, Jerusalem wasn't ruled only by Roman officials. It was also under the iron grip of a powerful priestly dynasty. At the heart of this religious political structure stood Annas, a former high priest appointed around 6 CE. Though officially removed by the Roman governor after a few years, Annas never truly lost power. Instead, he operated behind the scenes, becoming the architect of a dynasty that would dominate the Jewish high priesthood for decades. Annas was more than a religious leader. He was a political mastermind. 5 of his sons, and most notably his son-in-law Caiaphas, would each serve as high priest after him. Caiaphas held the position longer than anyone else in that era, from around 18 to 36 CE, an unusually long tenure which speaks volumes about the influence of Annas' household. Though Caiaphas wore the sacred vestments, it was widely understood that Annas remained the true authority, the one pulling the strings from the shadows. This priestly family controlled not only the temple rituals, but the entire economy surrounding it. Every Jewish pilgrim entering Jerusalem for the festivals, Passover, Shavuot, Sukkot, had to exchange their foreign currency for temple coins, the only type allowed for offerings. Who managed those money changers? The high priest's family. They also oversaw the sale of animals for sacrifice, charging exorbitant prices for lambs and doves, deemed acceptable by temple standards. The system was lucrative. The temple had become a well-oiled economic machine, and at its center sat Annas and Caiaphas. Religious devotion became a source of personal enrichment for a few, while ordinary worshippers bore the financial burden. This blending of sacred duty and economic exploitation made the high priesthood a position of both spiritual authority and staggering material power. Rome tolerated this arrangement as long as the temple leadership maintained public order and kept rebellion in check. In exchange, the high priests were allowed to manage internal affairs with little interference. It was a delicate balance of power. Annas and Caiaphas maintained peace on the surface, while ensuring their family's dominance remained unchallenged. In short, Caiaphas and Annas were not mere religious figures. They were the gatekeepers of a system that fused theology with political control, spiritual law with financial gain. Their decisions impacted every facet of Jewish life, and when a Galilean carpenter began disrupting that order, their empire trembled. The turning point came during Passover, a time when Jerusalem swelled with tens of thousands of pilgrims. Among the crowds was Jesus of Nazareth, a teacher from Galilee, whose presence in the city was causing unrest. His entry into Jerusalem, hailed by many as the coming of a king, was not just a spiritual moment. It was a direct challenge to the religious and political structure that Caiaphas and Annas had spent years maintaining. What alarmed the high priest wasn't just Jesus' growing popularity, it was his actions inside the very heart of their authority, the temple. According to the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew 21, Mark 11, Luke 19, Jesus entered the temple courts and overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those selling sacrificial animals. He condemned the marketplace atmosphere, declaring, "My house will be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a den of thieves." This act was more than symbolic. It was a direct economic threat to the high priestly family. Jesus exposed a system that profited from religion, and he did it in front of thousands of witnesses. Worse still, the people listened. They were captivated by his teachings, drawn by his healings, and whispered that perhaps he was the Messiah. Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin now faced a dangerous dilemma. If Jesus stirred the crowds into open rebellion, Rome would hold them accountable. Their positions and possibly their lives would be at risk. As recorded in John 11:48-50, Caiaphas argued, If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and then the Romans will come and take away both our temple and our nation. It is better that one man die for the people than that the whole nation perish. The solution was political assassination masked as religious justice. But they had to move carefully. Jesus was popular among the people, and any misstep could spark a riot. So they waited. They sought a moment of weakness, a betrayal, and they found it in Judas Iscariot, one of Jesus' own disciples. The Gospels state that for 30 pieces of silver, Judas agreed to hand Jesus over away from the crowds. The arrest occurred under the cover of night in Gethsemane, followed by a rushed and illegal trial conducted in secrecy in violation of Jewish legal standards. False witnesses were brought forward, and when their testimonies didn't align, Caiaphas directly interrogated Jesus, ultimately condemning him for blasphemy when he affirmed his divine identity. What Caiaphas and Annas didn't realize was that their plan to silence Jesus was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of something far greater. But in that moment, their motivations were clear: protect their power, suppress a perceived threat, and preserve the fragile peace that kept them in Rome's favor. At the exact moment Jesus of Nazareth breathed his final breath, the Gospel writers describe a sequence of events that shook Jerusalem literally and spiritually. These were not mere poetic flourishes. According to all three synoptic Gospels, Matthew 27, Mark 15, Luke 23, a series of supernatural signs accompanied his death signs that would have been impossible for Caiaphas, Annas, or any temple authority to ignore. The first was an unnatural darkness. From the 6th hour to the 9th hour, approximately noon, to 3:00 p.m., the skies above Jerusalem turned dark. This was no eclipse. Passover occurs during a full moon, making a solar eclipse impossible. Ancient sources, including the Roman historian Phlegon and early Christian apologist Tertullian, even reference a mysterious darkness during this time. To the people of Jerusalem, it would have felt like nature itself was mourning or rebelling. Next came a powerful earthquake. Matthew 27:51 records that the earth shook, the rocks split. This quake was strong enough to cause structural damage and widespread fear. At a time when people were already unsettled by the public execution, the trembling of the ground would have been interpreted as a divine response, an omen impossible to dismiss. But perhaps the most striking and terrifying sign occurred inside the temple itself. The veil of the temple, which separated the Holy of Holies from the rest of the sanctuary, was torn from top to bottom. This curtain stood nearly 60 feet tall and several inches thick. No human hand could have torn it, especially from the top down. The significance was immediate. The barrier that symbolized separation between God and humanity was gone. The very thing that justified the priestly monopoly on access to God had been supernaturally removed. To Caiaphas and the temple elite, this would not have been a trivial detail. It struck at the heart of their authority. If access to God was no longer mediated by the priesthood, what did that mean for their power? What did it say about the man they had just executed? Yet the signs did not end there. Matthew 27:52-53 records a mysterious and unsettling event. The tombs broke open and the bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. These resurrected saints, it says, came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. Though difficult to fully comprehend, this event was recorded to emphasize the cosmic significance of Jesus' death. It wasn't just another crucifixion. It triggered divine activity that defied the natural order. For the high priest, these events were catastrophic, not just theologically, but politically. The symbols of their dominance, the veil, the temple system, the illusion of control were being undone in real time. The power they fought to preserve was unraveling before their eyes. And though they may have tried to downplay or suppress what happened, Jerusalem had already seen too much. Just weeks after the crucifixion, when it seemed like the end, an unstoppable movement began to rise in the heart of Jerusalem. Instead of dispersing in fear, Jesus' disciples emerged in public stronger than ever. The tipping point came on the day of Pentecost, exactly 50 days after Passover. Acts 2 reports that while the believers were gathered together, a sound like a mighty wind came, and tongues of fire came to rest on each of them. They began to speak in different languages, so that Jews from many lands, Parthia, Egypt, Libya, Mesopotamia, heard and understood the message in their own native tongues. The event caused a stir, drawing thousands of people wondering what was happening. In the very place where his master had been condemned, Peter stood up and taught fearlessly. He declared frankly to the crowd, "You crucified the Holy One of God, and he has risen." His preaching was not only confrontational, but also convincing, causing more than 3,000 people to believe in a single day, Acts 2:41. That was the beginning of the Christian church. From there, the disciples did not stop. They healed a man crippled from birth right at the temple gate, Acts 3, shocking the crowd. When they were arrested by the same council led by Caiaphas and Annas, they did not back down. Before those who had executed Jesus, Peter declared, "The one you crucified, God raised up. In his name, this man is healed." At this point, the council could not deny the truth. The man who had been crippled was standing before them healthy. They could only threaten and release the apostles, fearing the reaction of the people. This event marked a turning point in history. From a small persecuted group, Christianity became an uncontrollable mass movement, spreading from the temple to the streets. More importantly, the Bible clearly records that many of the priests in the temple system converted and joined the new community, Acts 6:7. That is, it was from within the apparatus that Caiaphas controlled that power began to disintegrate. Not by sword or politics, but by witness miracles and courage in the face of violence. What the Jewish leaders thought would end with a cross now spread like wildfire in the dark. And no court, no threat, no bag of money could stop it. For nearly 2 decades, Caiaphas held the high priesthood, a rarity in Roman times. From AD 18 to 36, he was not only the highest religious figure, but also a symbol of political stability, at least in the eyes of the Roman government. But the rapid and uncontrolled rise of Christianity began to undermine that position. The turning point came around AD 36. Lucius Vitellius, governor of Syria and the region's supreme authority, traveled to Jerusalem on a mission. Sensing growing unrest, including the spread of a new sect that had just gotten out of control of the Sanhedrin, Vitellius decided to act. Caiaphas was removed from the high priesthood, ending an era of dominance for him and the Annas family in Jewish religious leadership. The removal was more than just the loss of a position. For a high priest like Caiaphas, it was the loss of all his foundations of power, influence, and honor. His name was associated with the crucifixion of Jesus, and now the Roman government, which had supported him, had turned its back on him. With no official position, no authority to command the temple, he faced a Jerusalem that was changing every day. The Christian community did not disintegrate, but expanded gradually, attracting both the old priests and the people from all over. For the Annas family, the collapse was also quiet but clear. Power once secured through strategic marriages and successive sons in the highest positions in the temple was now broken. After Caiaphas was removed, no one in the family was able to restore his former position. Privileges that had lasted for decades disappeared in a matter of years. There is no record of Caiaphas being executed or severely punished. However, the 4th century Christian historian Eusebius reports that Caiaphas was summoned to Rome, where he had to answer to the emperor for his failure to maintain order in Judea. In the political climate of the time, being summoned to the imperial capital was not an honor, but often a sign of loss of status, even exile or silent execution. The removal of Caiaphas was not just the end of an individual, but the downfall of an entire religious dynasty that had dominated both Jewish faith and politics. What had been built on fear and profit was replaced by a new wave based on faith, love, and the living testimony of a risen Lord. While much of history remembers Caiaphas as the official high priest who condemned Jesus, it was Annas, his father-in-law, who held the real power behind the scenes. Even after being removed from office by the Roman governor, Annas remained a dominant force in Jewish religious life, maintaining influence through his sons and son-in-law. But as the Christian movement gained unstoppable momentum, his grip on power began to slip, and with that decline came a brutal and humiliating end. According to early Christian traditions preserved in apocryphal texts and church writings, Annas's fall from power was followed by arrest and transport to Rome. His journey, however, was not one of routine legal proceedings. He was bound in wet ox hide, a cruel Roman punishment not commonly detailed in official Roman sources, but echoed in certain early Christian accounts. The method was horrifying. As the animal skin dried in the sun, it contracted, slowly tightening around the body with crushing force. The pain was excruciating. The leather constricted his chest, arms, and legs, eventually cutting off circulation and crushing his ribcage. It wasn't a quick execution. It was a long, suffocating death meant to break both body and spirit. Those who recorded the event described the agony on his face, the cries muffled as breath became impossible, and the shame of dying, not as a priest, but as a condemned criminal under Roman custody. Though this exact method is not verified in Roman legal texts, the symbolic message in early Christian storytelling is clear. Annas, who once used religious law to oppress others, died trapped and crushed by a force he could not escape. His fate became a whispered warning among early believers. One who had judged the Son of God now met divine justice in the most physical, irreversible way. Whether viewed historically or symbolically, the tradition of Annas' death reflected a greater truth taught among the first Christians. No position, no title, no dynasty can shield a man from the consequences of opposing God's will. His gruesome end was not merely a fall from power, it was a collapse into judgment. While Annas' fall was marked by physical suffering, Caiaphas' downfall was psychological, spiritual, and inwardly destructive. After losing his position as high priest around 36 CE, removed by the Roman governor Lucius Vitellius, Caiaphas faded from the historical and political record. But according to early Christian traditions, his true punishment came not through chains or exile, but through the torment of guilt that haunted him for the rest of his life. There are no canonical texts that describe Caiaphas' death in detail. However, apocryphal and early church writings suggest that the man who once stood over Jesus in judgment later descended into deep despair. Stripped of the authority he once wielded in the temple, Caiaphas reportedly became withdrawn, restless, and tormented by the enormity of his actions, particularly his role in condemning what was increasingly believed by many to be the Messiah. The weight of guilt can destroy a person from within, and for Caiaphas, the signs of inner collapse grew stronger with time. As the Christian movement exploded across Jerusalem and beyond, it's likely that he saw the irreversible consequences of what he once thought was a successful political maneuver. Miracles performed in Jesus' name, testimonies of resurrection, and even former priests converting to the faith, all of it was a daily reminder that he had failed to silence the very one he tried to erase. Some Christian traditions go further, claiming that Caiaphas ultimately took his own life, unable to live with the crushing burden of betrayal. While this is not confirmed in Roman or Jewish historical records, the narrative resonated deeply in early Christian communities. His suicide was viewed not just as a tragic end, but as a symbol of spiritual unraveling, a man once cloaked in sacred garments, now drowning in unrelenting shame. What made Caiaphas' fall so chilling was that it didn't involve public execution or exile. It was the slow corrosion of the soul, the inescapable echo of his own voice tearing his priestly robes as he condemned Jesus. Unlike Annas, whose punishment was visible and dramatic, Caiaphas' suffering was private, psychological, and perhaps eternal. His story became a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the most powerful can be destroyed not by enemies, but by the truth they refuse to accept. For Caiaphas, the silence of Jesus during his trial would echo louder than any accusation long after the crowds had dispersed. Just 4 decades after the crucifixion of Jesus, Jerusalem experienced one of the most catastrophic events in its history, the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE. This was not just a political defeat or military occupation. It was the complete dismantling of the religious, cultural, and spiritual epicenter of Jewish life. And for those who remembered the trial and execution of Jesus, the event carried haunting prophetic weight. According to the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, tensions between Jewish groups and Roman authorities had been mounting for years. When full-scale rebellion broke out in 66 CE, Rome responded with crushing force. Led by General Titus, son of Emperor Vespasian, Roman legions besieged Jerusalem. The siege lasted for months, and its conditions were horrific. Famine gripped the city. Internal violence erupted among factions, and desperation pushed people to unspeakable acts. By the summer of 70 CE, Roman forces broke through the final walls. They entered the city and advanced toward the temple, the sacred building that Caiaphas and Annas once presided over, with pride and power. Despite Titus's reported attempt to preserve the structure, the chaos of war and the hunger of Roman soldiers for gold led to an irreversible outcome. The temple was set ablaze, and as the gold melted between the stones, the soldiers tore the building apart stone by stone seeking treasure. This detail, not one stone will be left upon another, echoes the words attributed to Jesus in Matthew 24:2, spoken decades earlier. To early Christians, the fulfillment of this prophecy served as divine confirmation that Jesus' words about judgment and the end of the old order were not metaphorical, they were literal and unavoidable. The destruction of the temple had massive implications. With it, the entire sacrificial system ended. There was no more Day of Atonement, no altar, no Holy of Holies. The priestly class, including the remnants of the Annas-Caiaphas dynasty, lost their authority overnight. Without a temple, their religious and political power structure collapsed entirely. For early Christians, the fall of the temple wasn't just a tragedy, it was a transition. It marked the end of the old covenant system and the rise of a new era, one not based on location or ritual sacrifice, but on personal faith, the resurrection, and the indwelling presence of God. The symbolic veil that had been torn at Jesus' death now found its historical counterpart in the total destruction of the temple itself. The fall of Jerusalem in 70 CE remains one of the most significant turning points in Jewish and Christian history. And for the followers of Jesus, it confirmed what they had long proclaimed: no institution, no empire, and no earthly power can stand against God's sovereign plan. Ironically, the very individuals who sought to silence Jesus, Caiaphas, Annas, and Pontius Pilate, ended up playing critical roles in amplifying his message and solidifying his legacy. Their actions, intended to suppress a perceived threat instead, became the catalyst for the most influential spiritual movement in human history. The crucifixion, ordered and orchestrated as a political maneuver to preserve power and appease Rome, became the central symbol of Christian faith. Instead of erasing Jesus from public consciousness, they unknowingly fulfilled ancient prophecies and drew global attention to his death and resurrection. As Isaiah 53 predicted, the Messiah would be despised and rejected, pierced for our transgressions. These texts, written centuries before, came into sharp focus because of their direct connection to the events carried out under the authority of these men. Their names were etched into sacred memory, but not as defenders of tradition or maintainers of peace. They became symbols of resistance to divine truth, examples of how earthly power, when used to oppose righteousness, ultimately leads to downfall. Their decisions and failures were recorded in gospel accounts that would be read and repeated for millennia. They did not disappear into obscurity. They became permanent fixtures in a story far larger than their own. And yet the most astonishing element of this legacy is that God used even their rebellion to accomplish his will. The death they arranged became the cornerstone of redemption. The silence they demanded was broken by resurrection. The movement they feared spread across nations, languages, and generations, proving that no conspiracy, no injustice, no trial or cross could extinguish the truth. Their legacy is a paradox. They succeeded in killing Jesus, but failed entirely in stopping him. Today, their names live on not through monuments or honors, but through the cautionary role they play in sermons, scripture, and history books. They remind us that opposition to God's purpose may delay, but never defeats his plan. In the end, the high priest and the Roman governor, armed with soldiers' law and influence, could not stop what was ordained from the beginning. The stone they rejected became the cornerstone, and their unintended legacy is this proof that God's justice and mercy will always prevail, often in the very places where it is most resisted. The rise and fall of Caiaphas, Annas, and Pontius Pilate reveal more than just historical drama. They uncover a timeless truth: no human agenda can override the purposes of God. The very efforts meant to bury the message of Jesus only serve to lift it higher. Power fades, positions fall, but truth endures. Their stories were recorded not to shame, but to warn, to teach, and to awaken. They remind us that every decision matters, especially when it stands between fear and faith, between convenience and conviction. What do you think these stories say about power, justice, and spiritual accountability? Have you ever witnessed a situation where what seemed like a defeat became a victory? Let me know in the comments below. Your insight could encourage someone else on their journey. And if you found this video eye-opening or thought-provoking, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe for more deep biblical and historical explorations, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. Together, let's keep seeking truth where history, scripture, and the human heart collide.